You may remember how Lucy just walked to the back of the wardrobe one day and found herself in a whole new world of Narnia in C.S. Lewis's The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, the first in the series of the Chronicle of Narnia. Lucy soon encounters a rather large beaver, nearly as tall as she is, in this magical, mystical world. And as soon as possible, when Lucy goes back, she gets her siblings and takes them to this fascinating, fanciful world. Excuse me, just a minute. I seem to be having trouble with the mic this morning. Okay, so Lucy goes back and she takes her siblings as quickly as possible to this fanciful, fascinating world, and eventually the children end up in the home of the beavers, who begin describing Aslan to them and who take them to the place where they are going to meet Aslan for the very first time. As it begins to dawn on the children that Aslan is not a person, but rather a large lion, Susan asks, "Is he quite safe?" After a little more description of Aslan, Lucy asks, "Then he isn't safe?" "Safe," said Mr. Beaver. "Who said anything about safe? Of course he isn't safe, but he's good." Aslan, of course, is the Christ figure in the literature by C.S. Lewis. In this morning's gospel reading, as we hear John the Baptizer announcing Jesus, preparing the way for Jesus' ministry, we could begin to wonder, how safe is John really? And for that matter, how safe is Jesus going to be? Now, remember here, I'm going to be guided by the lectionary during these weeks of Advent, as I mentioned to you last week. And today we have Luke's Gospel as one of our readings. So listen, you pack of snakes, maybe not quite what good Presbyterians are used to hearing. Don't presume you'll be spared because you think your parents are important. If you don't produce good fruit, good works, good things, you'll be cut down and tossed into the fire. You ask what to do? Change your entire life. The one who is coming will gather in the good wheat, but the worthless chaff will be thrown into unquenchable fire to burn. A voice cried out in the wilderness. John's voice, God's messenger, coming before to prepare the way for the beginning of Jesus' ministry. And the people had to decide whether to listen and what to do. John was calling for repentance, a complete turnaround, 180 degrees, an entirely different way, a whole new life. John was calling the people to get ready for Jesus, who was about to enter the scene in a really big way, beginning something eventually to be called the church, something eventually to be called Christian community of faith. Now, according to the writer of the Gospel of Luke, it is right after this passage that John is thrown into prison. And not too much further down the line, he's beheaded. Is preparing the way for Jesus safe? No, not really, but it can be good. Now, what does that have to do with the church today? With how we are doing as Christian community, called to repentance, called to live as Christians in a discernibly different way? How are we doing as those called to continue Jesus' ministry? Rather frequently, it seems, I end up in conversations that go something like this. Why is the Presbyterian Church rapidly losing membership? Or how about the Christian church being in decline in general? Or how come mainline churches in North America are simply struggling to survive? Now, some of these things are true. Our denomination has been losing members for some years now, and it is continuing to do so. So-called mainline churches in North America are also in decline. But the Christian church is not losing members or vitality. The numbers are there, the excitement and energy are too, at least in other places around the world, and in many churches in this country as well. Now, I've made a few observations in the course of these conversations about the decline of the church, or at least the thought decline of the church. My first observation: the decline of the church is almost always presented as really bad news of catastrophic proportions. I wonder if just maybe we can look at this decline as some really good news, telling us where we need to let go, what we need to change, somehow setting us back on course. My second observation: generally, people see this decline in the so-called mainline church as something new and try to pin it on some recent societal trend. The fact of the matter, though, is that throughout history, whenever the church moves to the center, becoming mainline, if you will, decline begins and accelerates if there is no change on the part of the church. I wonder if just maybe this is a warning light, flashing to let us know the church has moved to the wrong place and needs to shift, or it will die. My third observation: there is a tendency to try to stem the tide and build membership using tried and true techniques that worked earlier, in a different time, in a different societal context, but may be dead in the water in the current time and place. Another interesting thing is that when we try something that doesn't work, we tend to respond by continuing to try the same thing over and over again, working harder and harder at it, really, really hard at it, even though nothing is getting better. I wonder if just maybe there is something new for us to learn from Christian sisters and brothers in growing, thriving churches around the world, and in vital immigrant churches in our own neighborhoods, Christians who are changing their communities and changing individual lives in countless ways. I wonder if there is something new to be learned from churches quite different from ourselves, churches more on the margins than where many of us live our lives. God's Spirit often is on the move in the margins, out of the mainstream, on the edges where people commit themselves to following the Jesus way against all odds, experiencing God's transformative power in amazing, wonderful ways.